Welcome back to another edition of Through the Smoke, a Miami Hurricanes football and recruiting podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Network. David Lake joined as always by Gabby Urrutia. We're here to have a little conversation that previews spring football. Spring football at the University of Miami is going to kick off next week. They're going to have Pro Day on Monday, so it's going to be a busy week here with spring football in full swing. And so we just want to have kind of a conversation about what interests us, what we're looking for, what questions maybe do we want to start to begin to have answered during the course of spring football here. We'll dive into that as well as some recruiting updates. Gotta dig into those here too. But before we do, want to highlight our sponsors, and we'll start with Canes Connection. That, of course, is Miami's collective. Play a huge role in the success of the program in general. Miami's roster is going to be loaded in 2026. They're going to be in the mix for another national championship run. Canes Connection helps make that happen through talent acquisition. So go support those guys any way you can, canesconnection.com. Also, our guy Nick Musarino at Musarino Law. If you've been injured in any type of accident, slip and fall, boating, trucking, Uber, Lyft accident, car accident, Nick Musarino is the personal injury attorney you should contact at 561-960-9870 or visit his website at flinjury.law.
Yeah, guys, and if you're in the market to buy, sell, or invest in South Florida real estate, hit up my guy, Aaron Pascal with Keller Williams, local born and raised, huge Miami Hurricanes fan and supporter of Through the Smoke, supporter and listener of Through the Smoke, knows Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County inside and out. You can grab a free home value report or a quick market update. Get real numbers from him at 305-497-5773 or visit apascal.kw.com.
All right, so Gabby, I want to start the podcast with recruiting news that we haven't touched on here on the podcast yet. It's been a couple weeks since we recorded a podcast, and during that time, Miami landed a huge commitment in local wide receiver Nick Lanier. Commits to Miami. He's currently a Carroll City wide receiver. He was at Miami Northwestern last year. That's where he played as a junior. He goes 6 feet, 170 pounds, number 16 overall player in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. So he's in that five-star range, five-star type of talent. Gabby, how big of a deal is this? Did you expect this type of commitment to happen surrounding that 305 day on March 5th?
Yeah, well, it's a huge deal that Miami landed Nick Lanier's commitment, and look, I think this was one that we always kind of felt good about, right? I think every time we spoke of Nick Lanier, we're just like, this is a five-star within reach. As you know, we kind of project this 2027 class. He's been high on Miami throughout the process. Wasn't quite maybe on the radar for it popping when it did. It was kind of unexpected, at the 305 day event. For those of you who haven't seen the video, kind of grab the mic, has Mario Cristobal right behind him, Malachi Tony, Bryce Fitzgerald, all the stars, and he announces in front of everyone that he's committing to Miami. And so that was a really cool moment. I think it kind of sets the tone too of just like a guy like Nick Lanier, a local five-star, committing to the program in the midst of his peers and in front of a bunch of other local targets, kind of telling everyone, like, the best stay home. So It was a massive win for the program. I think it represents, again, just Miami continuing to acquire talent at an elite level, and especially at a position like wide receiver, adding a player like Nick Lanier is a huge deal for the program.
Where does he rank in terms of like most impressive South Florida receivers you've seen, right? Like Jeremiah Smith's number one, right?
Right.
But South Florida is always churning out talented receivers. You've been doing this long enough where you've seen your fair share of talented South Florida receivers. Where would you put Nick?
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's probably just Jeremiah is in that tier by himself, and I don't anticipate anyone really reaching that for quite some time. He's probably in that next tier, honestly. Like, I really like JoJo Trader coming out of high school.
Yeah.
I think Nick Lanier is kind of like there as far as just like, man, this guy's impressive, and the way that he competes, his Man, I think just I think where Nick Lanier probably separates himself from JoJo is just kind of like the alpha factor, and I
Yeah.
think JoJo had that a little bit, but I think Nick Lanier has it to kind of a different degree. I watched Nick Lanier. I watched him on like the 7-on-7 circuit. We've seen him at UM, David,
Yeah.
during those
He was
7-on-7
impressive
stuff,
there.
and he makes some crazy circus highlight reel catches that just kind of drop everyone's jaw. And even this past season, went to go watch Northwestern versus Norland, where he kind of went one-on-one with Kenton Dobson, the former 2027 commit who reclassified, eventually signed with North Carolina. But that kind of stamped Nick Lanier for me as just like, this guy's a dog. This guy
Yeah.
knows how to win. He's physical, and look, he's probably not the fastest. He's not the biggest guy, but I think he's just such a crisp route runner. He's such a high competitor. I feel like he has just such strong hands and just the kind of motor and the juice. And you just like we talk about, you got to want it, right? Like you kind of got to just be a
Yeah.
dog. And I think
Competitor.
Nick Lanier I think he checks off all those boxes. And I think he's a really good program fit for what this wide receiver room is shaping him up into. Kind of in that Malachi Tony mold of just like, look, this guy's just gonna find a way to get it done. He's gonna find a way to win, and that's a lot of what stands out about Nick Lanier to me, and that's why I think he's probably in that second tier of guys I've seen down here.
The guy he reminds me a lot of, like from a body type perspective, the way he plays receiver perspective, and he predates you quite a bit, Gabby, but Amari Cooper to me is a similar player at the same stage as Nick Lanier. Same body type, same like elite at just tracking the ball, being able to time it up with his catch, can attack the ball too when he needs to, and a smooth route runner, like you were saying. So to me, that's like the comp if we're going that route. Amari Cooper, he's very similar to him. And you talked about too, just like how this is, a big deal for the program. Getting arguably the top local guy to jump on board, top local skill guy to jump on board early in this process. And look, you think back to a year ago, Miami Northwestern had a highly rated receiver in Calvin Russell, who Miami couldn't get to jump on board. And I think they were pretty frustrated that a guy like Calvin Russell, who had family ties to wouldn't jump on board early. He ends up at Syracuse, blah, 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 blah. But Nick Lanier, big time talent, getting him on board early is a big deal. Before we get off Nick Lanier, Gabby, I want to discuss just wide receiver recruiting in general, because this has been a point of emphasis for Mario Cristobal since he first arrived at Miami. And well, these three most recent cycles, so we're going 25, 26, and now the committed class of 27. It's got some impressive guys, and they are definitely flipping that room in a big time way.
Yeah, it's massive the way that they've flipped this room over. I mean, or just are in the process of it, and do a great job in the transfer portal. If we're
Yeah.
just looking at this 2026 season, but just beyond that, as far as just what's the future of this room look like? I mean, you start with that 2025 class, right? That's Malachi Tony, Dalen Upshaw, and Josh Moore for those listening at home. Like that, you have three pillars of the wide receiver room. They're excited about Dalen Upshaw. Malachi Tony's obviously a star. Josh Moore, I think his best football is still ahead of him. And then you
Hmm.
kind of dip into that 2026 class where signed basically two top 75 prospects at receiver in Samari Nwingo and Milan Paris, plus Van Spafford, who the reviews on him so far are very positive. He was at one point a top 100 talent in the class of 2026 before I think he had a limited senior season and, got bumped back, but a super talented slot receiver with a ton of juice. So that room, there's a lot of optimism about that. And then you kind of start the next class with Nick Lanier, and that's what we call stacking talent, David. And when we talk
Yeah.
about stacking talent, you got to stack talent. Like that is the textbook definition of stacking talent. They're doing a great job with the receiver room and how they're identifying and acquiring elite skill guys, and that's huge for attracting future quarterbacks. When regardless of what it is, that's what you got to do at those skill positions.
So let's go back to 305 day. Buzz coming out of 305 day. What is worth sharing still here, even a couple weeks later from 305 day? What really do you think stuck in terms of Miami having some recruiting juice, recruiting success on that day with some prospects in particular?
Yeah, I think. like, especially some of the guys at the top, right? Mark Matthews, the five-star offensive lineman, was kind of a late add to just the whole day. That's massive for Miami to get him back around the program at an event like this, where it's very intimate. It's at Coach Cristobal's house. So I think that Miami feels good about where they stand in that recruitment. And so I think Mark Matthews and the potential of adding a five-star offensive lineman, another local guy that we've talked about right there from St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale. Again, talk about stacking talent. If you're able to
Yeah.
do Jackson Cantwell, we can kind of do the same. We could start doing the same thing with the offensive line, right? You go Jackson Cantwell, Ben Cogden, even a Jaden Wilkerson, and then you kind of bring in a Mark Matthews, and it's like, man, like that would be big time. I think
Yep.
Mark Matthews sees the vision of potentially coming to Miami and sliding into a potential role or just feeling like it's the best fit for him. So I think that's very much on the table. Caden Henderson, top ranked linebacker in the Sunshine State. Miami's in a really good spot there. I think Corey Heatherman and Miami continue to hit all the right buttons in that recruitment. DeAnthony Lafayette, Ashari Charles, they pop out, park their cars to go hang out with Caden Henderson. I'm talking to DeAnthony Lafayette, and it's like that's his best friend. Like these guys are
Yeah.
hanging out, and I think that there's very real momentum to just being like, hey, Miami is surging as a program. Corey Heatherman is surging in his career and his notoriety as defensive coordinator, linebackers coach, and then I can play with my best friends too. Like Miami's starting to kind of I don't know, like he started to tilt his head a little bit and be like, hey, like I think that this is a situation I could see myself in, and this just fitting, this just working, and being able to stay in state. I think Miami's really the only in-state program he's strongly considering at this point of the process. So Caden Henderson, I think that's still one that's very much worth tracking. Myson Johnson Cook is a top-rated running back out of the St. Louis area, East St. Louis, so technically in Illinois, but David, we talked about him
Yeah.
going into 305 day. I mean, just getting eyes on him, seeing the body type, in no world should a kid at that size be running a 4.44 in the
Yeah.
40. Like what his 100-meter time, I think he's ripped off like a 10.35 100 meter. Like this kid is an absolute truck. Like this kid is a legitimate 6'2". He's got to be over 220 pounds, and to be moving at that speed is ridiculous. I think Miami has definitely kind of circled him as like one of the must-get guys this cycle, and I think they did a really good job of as far as just setting the tone in that recruitment. So I expect Miami to be players in that one just throughout the process, and then you got some of the in-state guys too. Davin Davidson, a quarterback, who I think Miami's in a really good spot with. Saden Gamble, a local safety out of St. Thomas Aquinas, that Miami really wants to keep home. He's a priority for the program. I think they've done a good job there battling Florida. And then a couple guys, I think they're in a really good spot with Josh Johnson out of Key West. Again, David, there's another guy. I think you got to get eyes on him, David. I mean, he's legit 6'4". He's 265 pounds. He looks awesome. And, again, I think limited junior tape. But physically, I could see Miami. I could see why Miami's intrigued and potentially rolling the dice on a player like this, willing to acquire him. And then Andre Hippolyte is a safety out of North Miami Beach, David, that we've talked about too. That Miami's just super high on this kid. I think that it's trending towards Miami eventually landing him, and I think they're in an excellent spot there as well. So a lot of really positive things coming out of that 305 day. It's going to trickle into next week, as you alluded to. Miami starting spring football. They're going to hit the ground running with a bunch of kids coming to campus. This first week is going to be huge. You start getting into Tuesday, you get into that Thursday visit, which starts kind of getting loaded up, and then that first weekend is going to be massive. So a lot of exciting recruiting buzz coming, here at Miami.
All right, we'll take a break here now. And on the other side, we'll get into spring football conversations. All right, we are back. Gabby, let's just have a free-flowing conversation, topics, questions, what you want to see, etc. What you want to talk about here with spring football here coming up. It's a big month for this 2026 Miami team because it's a Miami team that's very talented, very deep. But they still got to start forging their identity a little
Right.
bit in terms of like who they're going to be in the fall, and that starts in the spring. So, Gabby, I'll give you the floor first. Where do you want to go with opening up this conversation? What interests you here going into spring?
Yeah, a lot of my interests are, and look, I want to preface this by saying I feel pretty confident in this team and the way that the roster is constructed. So, I think there's just some things that we just don't know yet, right? I think one of the things I'm most intrigued by, David, is just what does this offensive line ultimately look like?
Yeah.
Theoretically, there's what, two or three openings on the offensive line, depending on how you kind of want to slice it. Um, so I'm just like, who's going to take this job? Like, Matthew McCoy's transitioning. I think it's the belief that he's transitioning to tackle. Samson
Yeah.
Okunlola, has one of those guard spots. He's played awesome and he deserves that. But like, there are three open jobs out here, and I think that it's a lot. There's a lot that we need to kind of figure out still, and I think that there's confidence in this unit. We heard Mario Cristobal talk about it when he came on our podcast that he still feels really confident in this group. But I think there's still a lot that we need to learn about the way that this is going to line up, left to right, like these different combinations. I'm super curious to see how this competition kind of has like the cream rise to the top type of effect.
Right.
Like who are going to be the guys that elevate and make the most out of this competition? Is there a shakeup we're not expecting yet? Like, is there something kind of coming down the pipe or that just develops this spring that kind of makes this maybe even more interesting than we're anticipating? So I think this offensive line situation throughout spring football is going to be super fun to monitor. Alex Mirabal, of course, is going to put those guys in situations to compete, and I'm just curious. We know that's one of the staples of this program, so we know how important it is, and so I think we need to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, for me, like, and I think you're feeling the same way. For me, like, I do have confidence that the offensive line's going to be good. I'm just curious what it looks like in terms of the starting five left to right. Because for me, like, I think I feel good, Gabby. I would say, like, judging from buzz and talking to people and etc. I feel good about eight offensive linemen right now. Matthew McCoy, Samson Okunlola, like you were saying, Ryan Rodriguez. So those are your veteran returners, essentially. Max Buchanan, everyone loves Max Buchanan. I think, the buzz is with him, like, yeah, he's probably best suited to be a guard, but he's kind of similar to me, like a John Feliciano type, where like, yeah, ideally he's a guard, but in a pinch, he could play right tackle if you needed him to play right tackle. He's that good. So I would expect him to be in the starting five. I think Jaden Wilkerson might be one of the most improved players on the team this offseason. So he's a guy that, came to Miami just as a raw 6'7", 6'8" offensive tackle that, needed to develop his technique some. And I think it's starting to all come together. And like I think about like the development job they did with Markel Bell, right? When he came his first spring. And you remember, Gabby, how raw he
Yep.
was when he first arrived. So I go back to that and I just think to myself, well, man, if they did that with Markel, to me, like Wilkerson probably has a higher ceiling than Markel. I don't know if it'll turn out that way, but I think Wilkerson has a higher ceiling. And so I think you got something there that you got to respect and try to develop. Jamal Merriweather, I know people inside the program are very excited about him and can't believe he only played, what, 60 snaps or so last year at Georgia. Jackson Cantwell, of course, the true freshman. I wouldn't be shocked if he just gets thrown into the fire at left tackle
Mhm.
at the start of spring. And then SJ Alafatuli, they do love him just as an explosive, powerful athlete. Yes, he's undersized in terms of height, but they swear that his wingspan and length is that of like a 6'5" offensive lineman. So they feel good about that. So I think that's eight guys, right? And you just got to figure out what's the best
Mhm.
combination of five at
Right.
Miami. And you got big athletic body types to go figure it out. I think the true freshman class is special, like in the long term, because you got Cantwell, who we talked about, the former five-star. Ben Congdon is a massive human being who, you know, he might have a bigger frame than Cantwell, honestly. And then Joel Irvin is another massive human being. So this offensive line with those three, for the future is going to be set for the next 3-4 years at least. And my take after just checking in with people more, like, I think it was fair to like, I mean, that was a position group that you just did not worry about last year. And look, I think it's fair to expect Jackson Cantwell, you're going to get thrown into the fire. He's going to take his lumps. And at some spring practices, he's going to look bad. But I think that's how you develop. That's how you get
Yep.
better. I think he has the mental makeup to get better from those type of days. And I think in the long run, game one against Stanford, I think he's going to be fine.
Mhm.
Um, but I think in general, like as the offseason has progressed, I am more and more and more comfortable and confident that this offensive line is going to end up being good.
Yeah. I think with Jackson too, I think what's important is from the context of he might look really bad. Let's remember who he might look potentially bad
Yeah,
against.
yeah.
And look, I think the
It's going to be
reality,
against the speed rush
right,
of Damon Wilson and Marquise.
Marquise
Like the
Lightfoot.
power stuff, he's going to be fine. He's going to
Yeah.
handle that.
Yeah. And look, if you give me, I don't know, 6 months of Jackson Cantwell getting refined by Damon Wilson and Marquise
Right.
Lightfoot and, Hayden Lowe and Armando Blunt and Scroggins and all those guys. And I'm going to feel good about what, again, with respect to our opponents, I'm going to feel good about
Yeah.
whatever's in front of him in a majority of these games that Miami has to play this fall. So I think Jackson Cantwell is going to be tested more on Green Tree than he's going to be tested in any potential football game he plays this fall. So
Hmm.
I think you got to take Jackson Cantwell and whatever, let's say, whatever it looks like in the spring. I think everything needs to be consumed from that context of like Miami has some really, really good edge rushers on this roster still. You still lose two first rounders in Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor, of course, but they're loaded along the edges.
Hmm.
And so I think it's going to be good for Jackson to go up against those guys. I think that's best case scenario for him.
Yeah. I think that group's going to be fine. And, I think, look, quote unquote, worst case scenario, if Jackson can't quite get it done at tackle, I think freshman year he could easily kick inside and hold his own as a guard because he does have the power and the strength. He already has that element. It's just the technique against the speed rushers that needs to be refined and worked on, and he's a freshman, so that should be expected. Um, Gabby, for me, like I guess where I want to go next. I'm curious, like I'm kind of excited that Miami brought back their coordinators from last year, and in particular, year two of Corey Heatherman. So what does that look like? I'm curious just how he builds on this year two of his defense because, last year was really about establishing a culture and a standard of effort. And what was the talk last offseason? Communication, communication,
Mhm.
communication. And, he couldn't believe that, what he walked into, the standard of communication that was there on defense. And so that was an area he really worked to improve during that time. And I think, he would tell you really it didn't get to the level that he wanted until like midway slash 3/4 of the way through the season. And so I'm curious, like, how do you build on that? And also too, like, do you get a little more creative? Do you add more disguises to what you're doing, etc. And I'm curious, like the returning players, particularly in the back seven. What type of leaps do they make within this system? Because now they know what to expect. So particularly like Motore, the corners, Zechariah Poyser and Bryce Fitzgerald at safety, those returning guys in the back seven, what types of jumps do they make here in year two of Corey Heatherman? And look, in this era of like, constant churns of rosters, I do think, like year over year, I do think it's important to some level. Now, changes are always going to happen, but to some level, it is important to have that stability of systems and continuity of systems as much as you can with your coordinators. And, I think we've seen the benefit of that with Shannon Dawson here now being here. How many years has he been here now?
I think it's fourth year.
Fourth year.
Yeah.
So that's a long time under
Yeah.
Mario Cristobal as an offensive coordinator. And I think we've seen the benefit of that with the way his offenses have always produced. And look, last year was an elite year one from Corey Heatherman at defensive coordinator. And so I'm curious, just like, what does it mean? What does it look like to build on that in the spring? Like, can you start faster in the spring? Do you still have to start kind of slow in the spring because you are welcoming in so many new players, just the nature of college football with the portal, et cetera. But I'm just curious in general, what does year two of Corey Heatherman look like?
Yeah, I think that's gonna be one of the biggest things. And I definitely agree that just from a communication standpoint, that was definitely one of the biggest things. And it felt like spring football was so kind of simple, and it was very like kind of teachy, just trying to get everyone like on the same page and organized and just making sure everyone was kind of speaking the same language. I remember talking about just understanding like the way that he teaches and coaches. And I think now that there is an understanding and a base of what that is, I am super curious too of just what it looks like just from the second year. And I think what's encouraging too, just on the defensive side of the ball, again, these rosters are new every year and there's obviously going to be new additions, but there's also a lot that's kind of coming back on the defensive side of the ball. Like you consider both starting defensive tackles, your starting middle linebacker Mo Torre's back. Kamel Bonner's been in the system for a year already. Zechariah Poyser, just at safety. Obviously, all four of the corners. You have Bryce Fitzgerald that's played in this before. I mean, there's a lot of people that kind of already understand what the standard and the expectation is. So building on Corey Heatherman in year two, I think is going to be a lot of fun. Like I am curious to see what it's going to look like. I think I know he always talks about just wanting to be pretty simple, and it's a lot of like
Yeah.
north and south. But these guys played. I mean, they played awesome, awesome football last year. I'm curious if like the way that how it kind of expands on that from that perspective, and what new wrinkles we
Yeah.
see, what more can be kind of added into this. Because even the year before he got to Miami, he was the first year defensive coordinator at
hmm
Minnesota, so he was also implementing a new system there. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but this might be the first time since Corey Heatherman's really been a defensive coordinator that he's been at the same place for two
I was
full
going
years,
to
right?
look
'Cause
that up. It
at
might have been at the
Rutgers,
FCS level.
maybe at the FCS level. I know
Yeah.
at Rutgers because he was a position coach at Rutgers before he
Yes.
became the defensive coordinator at Minnesota. So at least at this level, this is his second year,
Right.
his first time maybe being a defensive coordinator for two consecutive seasons.
Yeah.
So
You always have to evolve. And look, I
right.
think that was part of the issue, honestly, with Lance
Right,
Guidry.
because he had that one flash in a pan year, and then the
Yeah.
year two, it seems like he got figured out and wasn't able to adjust. So, like
Right.
Corey Heatherman's ability, because people are going to be hunting him now. Like
Yeah.
they're going to be coming after him, trying to figure out his defense. Like, how does he kind of continue to evolve and expand his portfolio and add to his menu of what to kind of throw at some of these offenses? So, yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. And then I mean, on the offensive side of the ball, I think it's huge, obviously, that we get the continuity that we have there with Shannon Dawson and the consistency of the system. And look, for him, this is his third straight year with a transfer
Yeah.
quarterback. So it's just kind of like I think it's already set as far as just understanding what it is to kind of teach this thing again to your quarterback and communicate this to your quarterback, having done it twice in a row. And again, I think it's a pretty simple offense, right? Like I don't think it's
hmm
super overwhelming. So I think it's always quarterback friendly, and I think he does a good job of kind of just staying mellow. Carson Beck and Cam Ward really both always talked about how Shannon Dawson was kind of like a safe place just because he always stayed so even keeled. And I think it'll be the same for Darian Mensah. So excited about this, man. This is when you consider the personnel and then you consider the staff and where those things are at the coordinators, there's a lot to be excited about.
Where do you want to go next?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess let's keep it on the defensive side of the ball. I am curious to see how the secondary is kind of organized,
hmm
as far as just okay, Zechariah Poyser theoretically comes back as a starting safety, and one
Yeah.
of those spots is kind of
I think
secured with
that's fair
Zechariah
to
Poyser.
assume. Yeah.
Yeah, and then four corners. I think we kind of know how that goes with the four corners. I think all four of
Rotate.
those guys are going to play, and so those guys will all be fresh. And if one goes down, I think there's enough depth there. What I'm super curious about, David, is what they do about the second safety and the nickel spot, because I think that there's a lot. I think every guy who you could kind of think of that could probably fill into that second safety role could probably also have an argument to play nickel.
Yeah.
So if it's Bryce Fitzgerald who picked off 6 passes, like he kind of stepped up into that nickel role last year when Keontae Scott went down and he played really well there. Omar Thornton could probably play a second safety role, but
Hmm.
he could also kind of come down and play the nickel too. JJ Dunnigan, the star freshman that has everyone kind of buzzing, he could play probably safety, or he can kind of come down and play the nickel. There's some buzz about Conrad Hussey too. Like Miami
Hmm.
thinks that he's someone who can contribute and play on this team. Like maybe I don't know about him as a nickel, but like he's someone that could probably be a
Safety.
rotational player and that second safety spot. Dylan Day played some good football,
Hmm.
down the stretch. Like, he almost made a game-changing play in that Fiesta Bowl, where, almost had a pick six, really. Like, is he someone that can be in that conversation? There's a lot of options, for that second safety spot. Again, there's also some potential turnover. And do they want to play a full-time nickel, kind of how they had Keontae Scott? Are they going to force that? Are they going to play that? It just seems like there's so much depth, and I
Yeah.
think that competition is going to be a lot of fun too. And how that situation plays out to me is going to be really, really interesting because look, Bryce Fitzgerald was really good at safety, but are you going to take away his superpower, which is that ball hawking ability, by kind of moving him? And I guess you could still have that to an extent in the nickel. Keontae Scott had 2 pick sixes, but Bryce Fitzgerald was also an eraser on the back end, especially on true passing plays. So I don't know. I don't know how
Who
that's
do
going
you
to
want
turn
to?
out.
Because I think nickel is the question, right?
Right.
What answer can they find at nickel? And then I think they go from there. Who
Yeah.
would you, who would you want to see? Let's say, because I think, like, entering the spring, it's probably safe to expect maybe they approach it with like a situational type of view of like,
Hmm.
okay, and again, I'm just making this up. I'm not saying I know this is what the plan is, but like, okay, in passing situations, maybe we want Bryce at nickel, and in running situate like where we anticipate the run, Omar Thornton could be the
Right.
nickel, right? Um, but you know, if let's say they were just going to ride with one nickel,
Yeah.
like you said, Keontae Scott was the nickel last year.
Right.
Who would you want to see emerge as that guy?
Yeah, for me, it's probably Omar Thornton. Just because I feel like he's someone that is experienced. I think he's someone that can make, like, he's proven to be kind of like a playmaker. As someone in the secondary, he could play the run. I think, which is important.
That's
He's
his strength.
physical. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think just him being physical. I think it's one of the keys to that. Does he have the playmaking ability of like a Keontae Scott? Like, I'm not sure. I would expect that, but I think what he brings to the table from that physicality standpoint, for me, again, if we were going like just true nickel, again, I expect a rotation. I think a lot of these guys are going to
Yeah.
end up playing this spot,
They
but
want
Omar Thornton to
four,
me,
like safeties slash nickel, right?
yeah,
They want four that
yeah.
they will
So
rotate.
right, and look, JJ Dunnigan, I'm on board with that. I
That's
think I
where I
probably
go.
just need to see it. Like
Yeah.
I'm waiting to see. That's what he's probably one of the players this spring I'm most interested to see because I've heard all the stuff and everyone seems excited about it. I know you're on board, David, and I'm not saying I'm not. I just feel
Yeah.
like it's one of
That's
those
fair.
things where Miami's so deep and we're talking about this true, like he must be really good. But like I feel like there's a lot of options and to just pencil in a true freshman as a potential starter or heavy rotational guy. Like I'm not saying I'm
No, you're
against that.
being rational.
Right. No,
Um,
yeah, I'm really curious to see how he really looks this spring.
yeah. I think this is just me guessing. I think by the end of the spring, we might be talking about how JJ Dunnigan is the nickel. Because honestly, like he's a bigger, longer defensive back than Keontae Scott, but like the way they talk about him is similar to the way that they talked about like Keontae Scott, where Keontae Scott could now his best position was nickel, but Keontae could play outside corner. Keontae could play either safety spot. Keontae could play nickel. That's kind of like the similar type of talk that they have when they discuss JJ Dunnigan. Like they feel like JJ, if they needed JJ to go play corner, he could play corner. They'll probably start him this spring at safety, and I'm curious just if they move him up to nickel as the spring progresses. I think he's physical enough. I think the coverage skills are there. I think he could be a total freak show of a nickel. But also like we're talking about, like they're probably just going to rotate a bunch of guys too. Which, when Keontae went down, that's kind of what they did. Like for sure, Bryce got most of the snaps at nickel, but they would also roll Jacoby down there.
Yeah.
They'd even put it was very little, but they would put Xavier inside sometimes and blitz him. So they'll probably rotate a little more rather than have just a true nickel, unless JJ Dunnigan goes and takes it and says, "No, I'm the nickel. I'm gonna go take
Yeah.
that job." So,
Yeah. It'll be fun. It'll be fun to track regardless.
um, let's see where I want to go. I'll take the low-hanging fruit of quarterback talk.
Yeah.
And really, what I'm just curious about, like we know Darian Mensah has the ability. Like I don't think there's really any concern about that. Like he's definitely going to be plug and play, right? But what I'm curious about is like how does he start to make his imprint on this team? Because we've talked about here on the podcast, like Cam Ward really did, he kind of changed who he was from a leader standpoint when he transferred from Washington State to Miami. He came to Miami and turned into an alpha dog leader, right? And things took off from there. Carson Beck got a fresh start at Miami. Georgia kind of trashed him on the way out. And, Carson, I think, was very well liked by the team. And none of whatever was said about him at Georgia wasn't true at all at Miami as it related to the situation at Miami. And really, like, he couldn't participate in the spring, but he used the spring as a time to establish himself as like a film junkie, a cerebral type of quarterback, a guy that would go to the film room with the rest of the offense and let them know how he thinks and maybe help them, etc. Know football just in general. So I'm curious, like, who is Mensah going to be from a
Mhm.
leadership standpoint? Because, how is he going to take charge of the team? Because, like really, if you think about it, how long has he really been here? Like a month, 6 weeks? Like he did just kind of get here in general. And so, I think he's made a nice first impression in terms of like what teammates think of him, what coaches think of him, what people around the program think about him. He seems like a good guy, etc. But this spring to me is a time for him to really establish himself as a leader and make a strong first impression in that sense. Because like as a player, like we know who he is. Like he's really good at getting the ball out quick. In that regard, he reminds me a lot of Cam Ward. Doesn't quite have the same arm juice as Cam Ward does at this point in his career, but he will get it out quick and feed the receivers quick. And he's going to be good, but that leadership element is critical at quarterback. And I'm just curious, like, how does Darian establish himself in that role?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I'm not sure if you saw on social media, Darian, I guess flew or I don't know if he flew him
I
out,
did
but they
see
were
that, yeah.
they were all Malachi Tony and Dalen Upshaw went out to LA
That's
to
great.
throw with Darian Upshaw during I guess their spring break time and all that stuff. So I think it's good that he's forming a connection with his top slot receiver, and we know the relationship and the connection he has with Cooper Barkate from everything that they did together while they were at Duke. So I mean, chemistry wise, I think it's good that all that stuff's building. But I think it's also a testament to just guys wanting to spend their off time with him and go out and spend time with him in his hometown. And but yeah, I think it's going to be huge this spring to see how he kind of just commands the offense and how he kind of just sets the tone of the room. We get Cam did that in an alpha dog way. Carson Beck did that in his own way, and I think Darian Mensah, we'll see how he does it. I am curious to see how he does it, and just asking around, like just I was kind of curious and poking around about like just like his personality traits and how he kind of goes about his business, and I get the sense that he's different than Cam and he's different than Carson. Like he's definitely like
Yeah.
his own person, not in a negative way or anything like that. So I am curious. I think his leadership style, I think it's more of just like, I think his leadership style is also going to be different than Cam's and
Yeah.
different than Carson's. So I think it is going to be important for Darian to still establish himself as a leader, but in his own way. And it's going to be fun to see how he does that.
Last thing I want to touch on, and then you can bring up anything else you want to bring up, and we'll get out of here. But similar to that, like leadership type of talk, I'm curious. One thing I want to see this spring, or I'm curious about, is like, and look, it doesn't like have to 100% show up in the spring, but I still think you need to see it a little bit. I'm just curious, like will this team still have that hunger? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like Miami tasted a lot of success last year with their deep run in the college football playoff. That was a massive step forward for the program. But, sometimes, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but like success can also breed complacency. And it's a bunch of new players too, a bunch of new leaders. Last year's leaders had last year's team had a lot of hungry, driven leadership, particularly on the defense, right? With Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, Keontae Scott, Jacoby Thomas. Like those guys were dogs on the field, and they're now gone. Now, Miami still's returning some guys with great leadership qualities, like Mark Fletcher, Malachi Tony, Ahmad Moten, Motore, Poiser. I think some of the corners need to step up into that role too.
For sure.
But I'm just curious, like what does that look like in terms of like really having that hunger of like, you know what, we came up short last year, and that needs to drive us as a team to get over that hump and get that last win. So, and look, I think in general, like it's a new team, new faces too. And I'm gonna say it, like I think this team probably is going to be like, I think they're prettier, across the board in terms of like the athletes they have and the body types they have. I think they're a deeper team at most positions compared to last year's team. But does this team, this 2026 team, have that grit that 2025 team had? Because that's what defined their run in the playoff, that grit. Do they have that dog mentality? To me, that's a huge question with this 2026 team. I think if they are a team that has that grit, has that dog mentality, then they're a team that's going to be in the mix again to go win it all.
Yeah, I think we've heard Coach Cristobal talk about this a lot. Like it has to be like the player-led leadership, right? It needs to come from them. And look, I think
Which I don't know if it's there yet, from what I've heard. Like I think they're trying to get that
right.
established.
For sure. Yeah, and I think that this spring is going to be big for that. And I think that there's candidates that you see it, but like there's also a lot of guys that need to kind of step up. And I think that
Yeah.
that's definitely one of the biggest spring football questions. And not saying that like this team's not like the competitive drive is down or anything like that, but I think
No,
that
it's
there's
new
definitely,
roles.
yeah, there's guys that need to step up into more alpha type of leadership roles because there is a big group, as you alluded to, David, of guys that filled that role and are gone.
Yeah.
And look, I think
And those guys stepped up. Honestly,
yeah,
like
a lot of those
Scott
guys,
was
yeah,
a
for
new
sure,
guy. Thomas
100%,
was a new guy.
yes,
Bain took a big step forward in
huge,
that
hmm
regard.
yeah,
Mesidor was more vocal
right,
last year than he
right.
was previously.
Right.
So,
I mean, you got Inez, who's had
Inez
that big
Cooper, yep,
personality. I mean, Matt would know it in a different way. I mean, he
yeah.
wasn't the rah-rah guy, but he's someone that still, kind of did his thing. But like Mark
But they all
Fletcher, yeah,
steps forward, and
right,
so this new wave now has to
right.
do it.
Yeah, so just got that needs to catch with this group, and I believe that it will. And look, these guys, don't run a program that's going to allow any of that. Like I think they're going to, I think they're going to be on them really hard this offseason for
Correct.
those reasons specifically. And these are the moments where it's just like, again, I think a lot of people have opinions about Mario Cristobal as a coach, but I think one thing he's going to do is make sure the energy is ramped up and that
Hmm.
that complacency and that competitiveness is going to be at all time highs coming into the season because I think that they're very aware of what they have and what this team is capable of. But that leadership aspect of it, that needs to show up. And so I'm excited to see because it's going to come. I'm just
Yeah.
excited to see who's going to kind of take over those roles. So yeah, I mean, I've been going personnel stuff, so I'll kind of keep the personnel discussion kind of going. But I think the wide receiver room and how
Yeah.
deep this thing is
Yep.
it's just going to be fun to watch, man. Like, I mean, that Cam Ward offense was fun, and it was the number one offense in the country. But Miami was like three wide receivers deep as far as just guys you felt good about, right? It was like Jacoby George, it was Xavier Strepo, and it was like Isaiah Horton, and then there was kind of like a big drop off after
Yep.
that. You had Elisha Arroyo in there too. Like this wide receiver room, David. Like I don't know where you're willing to draw a line. But this thing could be
I might go six, just
Yeah,
off the top of my head.
six. Yeah, it depends how you feel about some of these other guys. You go Malachi Tony, you go
Yep,
Cooper Barkate,
yep,
you go Josh Moore.
yep.
I mean, the
The
freshman, right?
transfers,
The transfer Cam Vaughn, Van Travius
so
Jacobs,
that's five,
Dalen Upshaw,
six.
and then it's just like if
I
one of
think
those,
Wingo, like honestly, I
yeah,
think Wingo's a freak. Like
yeah,
I don't know. I think Wingo's going to play a lot, and
so that's
and
seven.
they also are like I think in off-season workouts, we'll see how it looks with the pads on. But like Spafford
Yeah.
is
Or he could be like
really
a special teams, like he could always be like a special teams guy. Like I think it's gonna, and
they're
look,
kind of loaded at receiver.
just
They are.
talking to some of these people, they're just this is the deepest receiver room that they've had in their time here, and I don't think,
100%. It's
and
not close.
I just think supporting cast wise, like Darian Mensah has the best supporting cast of any of the transfer quarterbacks that Miami's brought in to this point in the program. I think as far as just like the skill position guys and running backs, and I mean this receiver room, like like the way it was described to me, like there's gonna be dudes like
Yep.
standing on the sidelines watching. Like dudes
Correct.
stand like and that's a I'm just like this is another one where it's just like, man, this competition could breed like someone that we're
Correct.
not expecting,
Who's
like taking
hungry?
a significant step. Like this like I think, and we've talked about this before, but this competition could. I'm hoping my best case scenario from this, David. I feel good about Tony and Cooper Barkett. It's probably two guys you plug and play,
Correct.
obviously, and then if this competition breeds or allows Josh Moore to kind of start getting closer to that ceiling and start scratching the surface because he's still a little raw and he's still, he did some really good things as a freshman. But if he could start hitting that next gear through this competition, like I don't know, man. I think
I think that's
Josh.
what's gonna happen.
I hope that's what happens
Um,
because Josh Moore has freaky upside and potential, and if he becomes the best version of himself through this, like
yep.
man, this is gonna be a really fun offense to watch.
I agree. And I think even if he doesn't, like Wingo's right there. I think they're really excited about Paris.
Yeah,
And then, you know what you're getting with those transfers too. Like
right.
that's your floor essentially
Hmm.
is Jacobs and Cam Vaughn.
Yeah,
So this wide receiver room,
yeah,
it's special. And staying with pass catchers, like honestly, Israel Briggs is really creating a
yeah.
lot of buzz too as a pass catcher. So he's exciting. And then Muller, a newcomer at tight end. And look, I think if you listen to this podcast, like I'm not play the freshman guy, but I think at tight end, I kind of lean towards like you just got to throw those freshmen in the fight. Kind of similar to like Brevin Jordan and Will
Hmm.
Mallory back in the day in
Yeah,
what like 2018.
right.
Um, they weren't ultra productive that year, but that offense didn't have the guys around those tight ends like this offense does. So that's where I
Yeah,
would go with
yeah.
with the tight ends. But
Body type wise, where you at with Izzy Briggs? Like, I know I think he's gaining weight, but I feel
he's
like that's
gained
the one
20
thing.
pounds, I was told,
Wow. Okay.
since arriving.
Yeah. So he
So,
might be able to
he's still got
as a
some to
flex tight
go.
end. Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely a flex tight end. He's definitely like he looks like a bigger wide receiver.
Right.
But from what I've been told, the ball's always finding him
Hmm.
in these off-season workouts. So, he's a guy to keep an eye on. I think he'll flash a lot in the spring. And you know, it's hard to ignore when the ball always finds you.
Right. Yeah. That's gonna be fun, man. This is
Yeah.
gonna be a excited for spring ball, man. This is gonna be. I don't
This
know.
team is loaded. I think,
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a team where, and again, we'll see how it looks in the spring. I think this is the first time of the Mario Cristobal era where it's yeah, obviously there's a difference between the first team and the second team, right? But I think in general, you're going to watch the first team go and do their thing, and then the second team's going to come out, and you're going to say to yourself, like, man, you know what? The second team offense and the second team defense are still really talented groups. And it's impressive how they're moving the ball and they're blocking these pass rushers, and also how these pass rushers are whipping the offensive line every now and then. So, just in general, the roster is in a really good spot. It's the deepest team I will have covered at Miami, I think. And yeah, we'll see how the spring plays out. But I do think it's all there. And to me, the only questions are like, this might be corny, but like cultural type stuff of like, okay, how determined is this team? How much
Mhm.
dog mentality and grit does this team have? Because the talent's all there, and now it's just making it all come together and fit together, and be a team that responds competitively to adversity. So this spring's gonna be fun. Go support us at InsideTheU.com. Check out all our coverage. Go sign up VIP subscription. This program is on a upward trajectory still, coming off a national championship game runner-up result. Appreciate everyone for listening. Gabby will be all over recruiting. Spring football is a huge, huge time for recruiting. Guys are going to be rolling through. Appreciate everyone for listening. We're gonna churn out pods more regularly with spring football here now. Appreciate you all for listening. Uh, you know, enjoy the basketball this weekend. Let's go Canes. It's going to be fun to watch them round one against Missouri. And
You gonna grind out that 10 p.m. kick or 10 p.m. tip?
I am. I'm going to Tampa
Oh, really?
to watch some games there. So
Ooh,
I'll be probably listening to it on my drive back home.
there you go.
But I'll be following it, and it'll be fun. Jay Lucas, great season. And anyways, we'll get here on that note. Appreciate everyone for listening. Go Canes. Take care.